Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into a place that never really sleeps. A medieval castle kitchen, long before sunrise, where the air is already thick with smoke and yesterday's heat still clings to the stone walls like it refuses to leave. You don't wake up gently here. There's no soft alarm, no stretching in warm blankets. Instead, you're dragged out of sleep by the distant clang of metal pots and the low crackle of a fire that never quite went out. And just so you know, you probably wouldn't survive this. Not because it's dramatic or heroic, but because it's relentlessly uncomfortable in ways modern life has politely erased. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, go ahead and drop your location and local time in the comments. It's always fascinating to see where in the world people are drifting off to these stories. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're already awake. Or at least, awake enough. The straw mattress you've been sleeping on offers little resistance as you push yourself up. It rustles softly beneath you, releasing a faint dusty smell. Around you, other figures are doing the same. Quiet groans, the shifting of tired bodies, the soft thud of bare feet touching cold stone. No one speaks much. There's no point, because the kitchen is already waiting. You step out into the corridor, and the chill hits you first. It's that strange pre-dawn cold that somehow feels sharper inside stone walls. But it doesn't last long. As you move deeper into the castle, following the familiar path, the air begins to change, warmer, thicker. By the time you reach the kitchen, it wraps around you completely. The door creaks open, and you're greeted by a wave of heat and smoke so immediate it almost feels alive. Your eyes sting for a second. You blink, adjusting. This is normal. It always is. The medieval castle kitchen is not a tidy place. It's not the neat, organised space you might imagine. It's loud, crowded, and already in motion even at this hour. A massive hearth dominates the room, its fire glowing low but steady, embers breathing quietly like something alive. A few early workers are already there, poking at it, feeding it small pieces of wood to coax it back into full strength. Because that fire, it never truly dies. In large castles, especially during the height of the medieval period, kitchens often operated almost continuously. The lord's household, guests, guards, servants, everyone needed to be fed, and that responsibility starts long before the sun even considers rising. You step closer, rubbing your hands together, not out of comfort but out of habit. The warmth is welcome, but it comes with a price. Smoke curls upward, slipping into your nose and throat. It's not overwhelming yet, but it lingers. It always lingers. You grab a rough cloth and begin your first task without needing to be told. Cleaning, not glamorous, not optional. The surfaces are already coated with a thin film of grease and ash. You wipe them down, the cloth dragging across the wood with a faint scratching sound. Nearby, someone dumps yesterday's scraps into a bucket. Bones, vegetable peels, bits of bread too hard to eat. Nothing truly goes to waste, but not everything can be reused. There's a rhythm to it all. Water sloshes in wooden buckets. Knives scrape against cutting boards. Someone coughs quietly in the corner. The fire crackles louder now as it begins to wake up properly. And then, the first voice cuts through. Sharp, direct, impossible to ignore. The master cook. You don't look at him immediately. You don't need to. Everyone feels his presence the same way you feel the heat of the fire. Constant, unavoidable, slightly intimidating. He starts giving orders, not loudly, but with a tone that carries authority. Bread needs to be checked. Broth needs to be reheated. Meat from yesterday must be inspected quickly. Because here's the thing about medieval kitchens. Food doesn't wait. There's no refrigeration, no neat labelling system. If something spoils, it spoils fast. And spoiled food isn't just unpleasant, it can be dangerous. Historians still argue whether medieval people had a clear understanding of food poisoning as we know it today, but they absolutely recognised when something was off. The smell alone was often enough. You move toward a wooden table where a slab of meat rests, partially covered with cloth. Carefully you pull it back. The surface looks fine. Maybe. You lean closer, taking a cautious breath. It's still usable. Probably. That's good enough. Nearby, someone is already grinding herbs with a mortar and pestle. the steady crunching sound almost soothing in its repetition. Garlic, onions, maybe a bit of thyme if you're lucky. Strong flavours aren't just for taste, they help mask anything less pleasant. A small, almost amusing detail slips into your mind as you work. In some parts of medieval Europe, cooks believed that certain herbs could balance bad meat, making it safer to eat. Whether that actually worked is debatable. But it's comforting in a way to think you're doing something. The light outside is still dim, barely filtering through the narrow windows high up in the stone walls. You don't see the sunrise from here. You feel it instead slowly as the kitchen grows busier. More people enter, more noise builds. The quiet of early morning fades into something more alive, more chaotic, and you're right in the middle of it. Your hands are already working without pause, cutting, cleaning, carrying. There's no real moment to think, only to do. And yet, somehow your mind drifts. You wonder, briefly, about the people upstairs. The lord, the lady, their guests. They'll wake later. Eat food that passes through your hands but never know your name. That's just how it is. The kitchen exists slightly outside the world of the Great Hall, close enough to serve, far enough to remain unseen. And maybe that's for the best, because if they did see this place, the smoke, the sweat, the constant motion, it might ruin the illusion. Or maybe not. Maybe they simply wouldn't care. You shift your weight, stretching your back for just a second before returning to work. The day hasn't even properly started, and already it feels like you've been here for hours. That's the strange thing about this life. Time doesn't move in hours or minutes. It moves in tasks, in fires that need tending, in meals that need preparing, in endless quiet repetition. And as the fire finally roars to full life, sending a fresh wave of heat across the room, you realise something simple, something unavoidable. This is only the beginning. You barely notice when the kitchen fills completely. It happens gradually, one more pair of hands, then another, until the space that felt merely busy a few moments ago becomes something tighter, more layered. You shift slightly to avoid bumping into someone carrying a pot, only to find someone else already stepping into the space you just left. There's no wasted movement here, or at least there isn't supposed to be. Very quickly you begin to feel it, that invisible structure beneath all the noise. It's not written down anywhere. No one explains it to you, but it's there, shaping everything. The hierarchy. At the top, of course, is the master cook. You catch glimpses of him as you work, never still for long, always moving with purpose. He doesn't rush exactly. That would suggest panic. Instead, he moves like someone who already knows how everything should unfold, and everyone else adjust around him. Below him are the senior cooks. They handle the important dishes, the ones that will actually be seen and judged in the Great Hall. Roasted meats, delicate pastries if the castle is wealthy enough, carefully seasoned stews. Their work is precise, deliberate. They don't look at you much, not out of cruelty, more out of habit. You exist, but not in their immediate concern. You, along with many others, belong further down. You're somewhere in the middle, trusted enough to handle food, but not important enough to decide what that food becomes. Below you are the scullions. You can always spot them. Their hands are rougher, constantly wet, often reddened from cold water and harsh scrubbing. They handle the dirtiest work, washing pots, scraping burnt bits from the bottoms of pans, hauling buckets in and out. It's exhausting, repetitive work, and yet strangely essential, because without them, everything stops. You pass one now, a young boy struggling slightly with a heavy wooden tub filled with cloudy water. For a moment your eyes meet. There's no smile, no nod, just a brief understanding. Everyone here is tired. And then, just above everyone but still beneath the master cook, there's someone else, the steward. He doesn't cook, not really, but his presence carries a different kind of weight. He's responsible for supplies, for accounting, for making sure nothing valuable disappears. His eyes move constantly, watching, measuring. In some castles, stewards held significant power, sometimes even more than the cooks themselves. After all, controlling food means controlling access, and that matters. Historians still argue whether kitchen staff had opportunities to subtly influence politics through food, small favours, quiet adjustments, an extra portion here or there, but it's clear that proximity to the kitchen could mean proximity to power. You don't think about that too deeply. You just focus on not making mistakes, because mistakes travel upward, and consequences travel downward. A sharp voice calls out from across the room. Not angry, just firm. Someone has cut something unevenly. You glance over briefly. The correction is quick, almost routine. The person nods, adjusts, continues. There's no time for embarrassment. Everything here moves too fast for that. You reach for a knife, its handle worn smooth from years of use. It fits into your hand almost naturally. The blade isn't perfect, slightly uneven, a bit dull near the tip. But it works. You begin slicing onions. The motion is steady, repetitive. The scent rises quickly, sharp and biting. Your eyes sting, but you don't stop. No one does. Around you, similar tasks unfold in quiet synchronization. Chopping, grinding, stirring. There's something almost hypnotic about it. A rhythm, a system. Even the noise begins to blend together. The crackle of fire, the scrape of metal, the low murmur of voices. It becomes less chaotic the longer you're inside it. More predictable. You start to understand your place not as something assigned, but something felt. You don't need instructions for every task. You watch, you listen, you adjust. When a pot needs moving, you move it. When something needs cutting, you cut. When someone higher in rank steps forward, you step back. It's a quiet choreography, and everyone knows their steps. A faint smell drifts through the air, bread. You turn slightly, just enough to see a senior cook checking a batch near the edge of the hearth. Bread is important, more than important really. It's the foundation of most meals, especially for the lower ranks of the household. In medieval Europe, bread wasn't just food. It was often used as a kind of edible plate called a trencher. Thick slices would hold meat or stew, soaking up juices before being eaten, or sometimes given away to the poor afterward. You imagine that for a moment. Food passing through so many hands, serving so many roles. Nothing simple about it. A sudden clatter pulls you back. A pot slips, just slightly, but enough to make everyone nearby tense for a second. It doesn't fall, no disaster, just a reminder. Things can go wrong, easily. You notice too how little is actually said. There's communication, of course, orders, confirmations, quick corrections. But no long conversations, no storytelling, not here, not now. That happens later. Maybe. Right now, the hierarchy demands focus. A quirky thought crosses your mind as you continue slicing. In some medieval kitchens, it was believed that certain positions could only be held by people of specific backgrounds or training. Not officially written rules, but traditions, passed down, reinforced over time. Whether that's entirely true everywhere, historians still debate. But looking around, it's easy to believe. People here seem shaped by their roles. The master cook moves like someone who has spent years mastering control. The scullions move like they've accepted endless repetition. And you're somewhere in between. Learning, adjusting, becoming. The light from the windows shifts slightly, growing just a bit stronger. Morning is arriving even if you don't see the sun directly. The kitchen responds in its own way, not by slowing down, but by intensifying. Breakfast preparations begin. Faster movements, more urgency. You wipe your hands quickly on your apron, reaching for the next task before it's even fully assigned. There's a kind of anticipation now, a sense that everything needs to come together at exactly the right moment. Because soon, the people upstairs will wake, and when they do, everything here must already be in motion, already prepared, already perfect, at least on the surface. You take a small breath, barely noticeable, and step forward again into the rhythm. Because here, in this place, your role isn't just something you do, it's something you become. The fire is no longer something you approach carefully. Now, it surrounds you. By the time the kitchen fully wakes, the hearth has transformed from a quiet glow into something far more demanding. Flames climb and twist, licking at iron grates and blackened stones, sending waves of heat outward that settle into your skin and refuse to leave. You don't step closer to warm yourself anymore. You step closer because you have no choice. and almost immediately you feel it. The heat presses against your face, dries your lips, settles into your clothes. Within minutes you're sweating. Not lightly, not comfortably, but in that steady, persistent way that never really stops. It beads along your forehead, runs down your back, soaks into the fabric that clings to your skin. There's no escaping it. Not here. You shift slightly, trying to find a position where the heat is manageable. It doesn't exist. One step back, and you're in someone else's way. One step forward, and the fire reminds you exactly who's in control, so you adapt. You always adapt. The air itself feels thicker now, heavier. Smoke drifts upward in slow, curling patterns. But not all of it escapes. Some of it lingers, caught beneath the high ceiling, spreading just enough to sting your eyes and tighten your throat. You cough once, quietly, automatically. No one reacts, because everyone is breathing the same air. In many medieval kitchens, especially the larger ones, ventilation was limited. Chimneys existed, of course, but they weren't always efficient. Smoke had a habit of staying exactly where it wasn't wanted. Historians often point out that long-term exposure to smoke like this could cause respiratory problems, though people at the time wouldn't have described it that way. For them, it was simply part of the work, something you endured. You reach for a long wooden tool, a kind of paddle used to adjust logs deeper within the hearth. The handle is warm, almost hot, but manageable. Carefully you push a half-burned log further into the flames, watching as sparks briefly flare upward before settling again. Fire management isn't just about keeping it alive, it's about controlling it. Different foods need different levels of heat. Too much, and you burn everything. Too little, and nothing cooks in time. And with no precise dials or temperature gauges, everything depends on experience and instinct. You glance toward one of the senior cooks, watching how he positions a pot. Not directly over the flames, but slightly to the side where the heat is gentler. You mimic the motion with your own task, adjusting without thinking too much about it. This is how you learn. Not through instruction, but through observation. A sudden burst of laughter cuts briefly through the noise, a rare sound here. You glance over to see two workers exchanging a quick comment. It doesn't last long. It can't. The rhythm pulls them back in almost immediately. Still, it lingers. A reminder that even in this heat, this pressure, there are small moments of something lighter. You wipe your forehead with the back of your arm, leaving a faint streak of ash without realizing it. Your hands are never truly clean here. Even when you wash them, the traces remain: smoke, grease, the scent of whatever you handled last. It becomes part of you. There's a sudden shift in the fire, a louder crack, a small collapse as a piece of wood gives way. Instinctively, you step back half a pace. A few sparks jump outward, glowing briefly before fading on the stone floor. No one panics. They've seen worse. Kitchen fires, in fact, were one of the constant dangers in medieval castles. With so much open flame, so much dry wood, accidents could happen quickly. Entire sections of castles have been lost this way, and yet the fires remain, because they have to. You move again, this time lifting a heavy iron pot with the help of a cloth wrapped around your hand. The heat radiating from it is intense, almost shocking, even through the fabric. You set it down carefully, adjusting its position by just a few inches. That small movement matters. Everything here is about small adjustments. A little closer, a little further, a little longer, a little less. You begin stirring, the contents thick and slow moving. Steam rises, carrying with it a mix of scents. Meat, herbs, something slightly bitter underneath. You lean in just enough to check, careful not to get too close. There's a skill to this. Not just cooking, but enduring. Your body starts to find a strange balance. The heat doesn't feel less intense, but you react to it differently. Your movements become more efficient, less wasted. You stop thinking about discomfort as something separate. It simply exists, like the smoke, like the noise, like the endless motion around you. A quirky detail slips through your thoughts as you stir. In some medieval kitchens, cooks believed that the way a fire behaved could reflect unseen forces, luck, fortune, even divine favour. A fire that burned too wildly or too weakly might be taken as a sign of something off. Superstition, maybe. Or just another way to make sense of a world that doesn't always explain itself. You adjust the pot again, watching the surface ripple slightly. It's not boiling yet. Not quite. You wait, stirring slowly, feeling the weight of the spoon in your hand. Nearby, someone fans a smaller flame using a piece of cloth, carefully increasing the heat for a separate dish. The movement is controlled, practiced. Too much air, and the fire might flare dangerously. Too little, and nothing changes. Everything is balance. Historians still argue whether medieval cooks relied more on instinct or tradition, whether their methods were passed down rigidly or adapted freely in the moment. Standing here, watching it unfold, it feels like both. A kind of inherited intuition. You shift your stance again, your legs already beginning to feel the strain of standing so long on hard stone. There's no place to sit. Not really. Not during this part of the day. You glance briefly toward the doorway. It's still early. Still time before the first meals are sent out. But the pace is building. You can feel it in the way people move, in the slight increase in urgency, in the way tasks overlap more tightly. The fire roars a little louder now, fully awake, and you realise something simple, something unavoidable. The fire doesn't care if you're tired, it doesn't slow down, it doesn't pause, it just burns, and you keep moving with it. By now, the fire feels almost like a constant presence behind you, steady, demanding. But your attention begins to shift elsewhere, toward the food itself, because before anything reaches the table upstairs, it begins in a far less refined state. Nothing arrives neatly prepared, nothing is clean in the way you might expect. Everything comes from somewhere. Fields, forests, rivers, and it carries traces of that journey with it. You find yourself standing over a rough wooden table again, this time with a pile of vegetables that still look very much like they came out of the ground. Carrots, uneven and coated with clumps of soil. Turnips, knotted and slightly misshapen. A handful of leeks, their outer layers rough and fibrous. You reach for a knife and begin trimming, peeling, scraping away what doesn't belong, or at least, what shouldn't belong. Because perfection isn't the goal here. Usability is. You work steadily, brushing dirt aside, occasionally wiping your hands on your apron without thinking. Water is used, of course, but carefully. It has to be carried in, bucket by bucket, and every drop matters. So you learn to clean efficiently, not thoroughly, not by modern standards, just enough. Nearby, someone is plucking a bird, feathers drifting lazily to the ground, catching briefly in the air before settling among ash and straw. The process is methodical, almost rhythmic. Tug, pull, discard. Tug, pull, discard. It's strangely quiet work. You glance over for a moment, then back to your own task. There's always something slightly grounding about seeing food in its earliest stage, before it becomes something else entirely. In a medieval castle, ingredients came from a variety of sources. Some were grown on nearby lands controlled by the lord. Others arrived through trade, spices, dried fruits, perhaps even more exotic items if the castle was wealthy enough. But most of what you handle is simple, local, seasonal. Historians often emphasise how dependent medieval diets were on the time of year. Fresh produce wasn't always available. What you cook today depends heavily on what was harvested recently, or what has managed to survive storage. You pick up a turnip, turning it slightly in your hand. It's firm. Good enough. You slice into it, the knife pressing through with a satisfying resistance. The pieces fall into a wooden bowl joining the others. There's a certain repetition to this work that begins to settle into you. Cut, clean, sort, repeat. Over and over again, until the pile slowly transforms into something more manageable, something usable. A faint scent drifts across the table, stronger now. Someone nearby has started working with garlic in larger quantities. It mixes with the earthy smell of vegetables, the ever-present smoke, the faint metallic tang of tools. It's not unpleasant, just intense. You pause for half a second, flexing your fingers before continuing. The knife handle presses into your palm in a way that's becoming familiar. Not painful, exactly, just constant. Everything here is constant. A small commotion draws your attention briefly, a basket being set down a bit too quickly, its contents shifting. A few items roll free. Apples, slightly bruised but still usable, they're quickly gathered. Nothing wasted. Even bruised fruit has a purpose. You return to your task, but your mind drifts again. This time to something slightly more unusual. In certain medieval recipes, combinations of ingredients could seem unexpected. Sweet and savoury mixed freely. meat cooked with fruits, spices layered in ways that might feel unfamiliar today. There wasn't the same strict separation of flavours. Some historians suggest this was partly due to preservation techniques, using whatever was available to enhance or mask taste. But others argue it reflected a genuinely different palate. Historians still argue whether medieval people preferred stronger, more complex flavours than we do today, or whether their choices were simply shaped by necessity. Either way, you'll be working with whatever is placed in front of you. You finish one batch of vegetables and move on to the next without pause. There's no clear moment of completion here. Just a shift from one task to another, like stepping stones across a river that never quite ends. A large sack is opened nearby, revealing grains, coarse, uneven. Someone begins measuring them out, not with precision instruments, but by experience. Handfuls, scoops, estimations. It works. It has to. You reach for a cloth and wipe the table briefly, pushing aside scraps into a small pile. These won't necessarily be thrown away. Some might go into broths, some might feed animals, some might simply disappear into the general cycle of use. Very little truly leaves the system. A curious detail surfaces in your thoughts as you work. In some places, kitchen scraps were so valued that they were carefully collected and redistributed, not wasted, but repurposed in ways that extended their usefulness far beyond the initial meal. Efficiency wasn't a choice, it was survival. You pick up another vegetable, examining it briefly before cutting. There's a rhythm now, not just in your hands, but in your thoughts. You don't question each step, you follow it, trust it. Around you, the kitchen continues its steady transformation. Raw becomes prepared, unfinished becomes ready. Bit by bit, the ingredients shift closer to their final form. You notice how each station connects to the next. What you prepare here will move elsewhere, into pots, onto spits, into ovens. Your work is just one part of a much larger process, and yet it matters. If something is cut poorly, it cooks unevenly. If something isn't cleaned enough, it affects everything that follows. Small actions ripple outward. You feel that responsibility, even if no one says it directly. The light in the room grows slightly stronger again. Morning is moving forward. Time, once again, is measured not by clocks but by progress. How much has been prepared? How much remains? You shift your weight, stretching your shoulders just slightly before continuing. There's still more to do. There's always more to do. And as you reach for the next ingredient, you realize something simple, something steady. Nothing begins finished. Everything becomes, and you're right there, in the middle of that becoming. By the time the first real wave of cooking begins, the kitchen no longer feels like preparation. It feels like performance. Not the kind meant to entertain, but the kind where everything must happen at exactly the right moment, with no visible hesitation. Because somewhere above you, beyond the smoke, beyond the noise, someone is waiting to be satisfied. And that someone matters. You don't see the Lord directly, not often, but his presence is felt in everything that happens here, in the choice of ingredients, in the urgency of certain dishes, in the way the master cook's voice sharpens just slightly when something isn't perfect. Because feeding a noble household isn't just about nourishment, it's about expectation. You find yourself standing near a long wooden surface where cuts of meat are being prepared, larger now, more carefully handled. This isn't the rough chopping from earlier. This is deliberate, almost precise. A senior cook gestures slightly and you step forward without being called by name. You already know what to do. Hold. Steady. The meat is heavy in your hands as it's adjusted, trimmed, inspected. You feel the weight of it. Not just physically, but in what it represents. This isn't just food. This is presentation, status, power, in its own quiet way. In medieval castles, the type of meat served could say a lot about wealth and rank. Beef, pork, venison, each carried its own meaning. Game meats, especially, were often reserved for the nobility, tied closely to hunting rights. Historians note that access to certain foods wasn't just about availability, it was about permission. And you are very far from the people who grant that permission. You step back as the cut is approved, moving quickly to the next task. There's no pause for admiration, no time to reflect on the quality. The moment passes, replaced immediately by the next requirement. Nearby, a spit has been set over the fire, slowly turning. The meat attached to it glistens faintly, fat beginning to render and drip into the flames below. Each drop hisses as it hits, sending up brief bursts of scent. Rich, heavy, almost overwhelming. You watch it for a second longer than necessary, noticing how carefully it's positioned. Not too close, not too far. The rotation is steady, often done by hand or with a simple mechanism. In some kitchens, turning the spit was considered one of the more tedious jobs. It required constant attention, sometimes for hours. Miss a moment, and the cooking becomes uneven. It's the kind of task that sounds simple, until you're the one doing it. A voice cuts in again, sharp, focused. A dish needs adjusting, more herbs, less heat. You move instinctively, grabbing what's needed, passing it along without interrupting the flow. There's a strange satisfaction in this, not pride exactly, but a sense of alignment, everything moving as it should. You begin working on a mixture, grains combined with broth, stirred slowly to thicken. It's not the centerpiece of the meal, but it matters. It fills, it supports, it completes the plate. Not every dish is meant to impress. Some are meant to sustain. A faint tension builds in the air as more dishes approach completion. You can feel it in the way people move, faster now but also more careful. This is the moment where mistakes become visible, and visibility is dangerous. You glance toward the master cook. He's watching everything, not hovering, not interfering constantly, but aware, completely aware. His eyes move from one station to another, catching details you might miss. He doesn't need to raise his voice often. His silence does enough. There's a small, almost unnoticed adjustment made to one of the dishes, just a pinch of something added at the last moment. You don't even see what it is. Only the result. Balance. That's what they're chasing. A quirky thought drifts into your mind as you stir your own pot. In some medieval courts, food wasn't just about taste, it was about spectacle. Elaborate dishes shaped into animals, bright colours achieved through natural dyes, combinations designed to surprise. Some of those dishes were less about being eaten and more about being seen. Historians still argue whether these extravagant displays were common or reserved for the wealthiest households, but the idea lingers. Food as performance. You glance down at your own work, simpler, practical, necessary, but still part of the same system. A tray is prepared nearby, carefully arranged, each item placed with intention. This is what will leave the kitchen. This is what will be seen. You don't touch it. That's not your role. Instead, you step back slightly, making space as it's lifted and carried away. For a brief moment, the path clears, and you catch a glimpse of the doorway leading toward the upper halls, and then it's gone. The tray disappears, swallowed by the corridors of the castle, heading toward people who will never think about the heat, the smoke, the hands that prepared their meal. You return to your task without hesitation, because another dish is already underway. There's no pause between servings, no moment where the kitchen rests and admires what it's done. As soon as one set of food leaves, another begins to take its place. It's continuous, endless, almost. You adjust your pot again, checking its consistency. Thicker now, almost ready. You add a small amount of liquid, just enough to keep it from becoming too dense. Small decisions, constant decisions. You don't question them anymore, they happen naturally. A faint sound reaches you, distant, barely audible. Laughter maybe, from above, from the hall, the people eating. You imagine them for a moment, sitting at long tables surrounded by light, conversation, comfort. The food arrives, warm and prepared, as if it simply appeared. No smoke, no sweat, no noise, just the final result. You blink and the image fades. Because here, in the kitchen, the process never disappears. It surrounds you, shapes you, defines you. You lift the spoon again, stirring slowly, feeling the weight of the moment settle into something familiar. This is what it means to cook here. Not just to make food, but to serve something larger than yourself. Even if no one ever knows your name, by the time the first meals have left the kitchen, you might think, just for a moment, that things will ease. They don't. If anything, the next phase feels quieter, but more uncertain. Because now the question isn't just what to cook, it's what's still safe to cook. You find yourself back at the preparation table, this time facing something less predictable than fresh vegetables or newly cut meat. These are items that have been sitting, waiting, stored in conditions that are less than ideal. A slab of salted meat, a basket of slightly soft apples, a jar of something preserved, though it's hard to say exactly how long ago. You hesitate, just briefly. Then you begin. Because hesitation doesn't change anything. In a world without refrigeration, time is always working against you. Food doesn't last the way you might expect it to. It changes, sometimes subtly, sometimes quickly. And your job isn't to stop that process. It's to work around it, to manage it. You pick up the salted meat first. Its surface is firm, almost rigid. Salt has drawn out much of the moisture, preserving it in a way that slows decay. It's one of the most common techniques used here. Effective, but not perfect. You bring it closer, inspecting it carefully. There's a smell, strong, but not necessarily bad, just intense. You've learned to read these signals, to trust your senses, even when they don't give you clear answers. You trim away a small section, discarding what doesn't seem right. Not too much. You can't afford that. Every cut matters. Nearby, someone is working with fish, dried, slightly brittle, its scent sharp enough to cut through even the smoke-filled air. Preservation methods vary, but the goal is always the same: extend usefulness for as long as possible. Drying, salting, smoking. Each technique leaves its mark, not just on the texture, but on the flavour. You move on to the apples, pressing one gently with your thumb. It yields slightly. Not spoiled, but close. You set it aside for immediate use. These won't last much longer. Nothing here is wasted if it can still be used. That's the rule. A bucket of liquid sits nearby. Vinegar by the smell of it. You watch as someone dips vegetables into it briefly before preparing them further. It's not just for flavour. It's believed to help cleanse, in a way. Whether it actually does is another question. Historians still argue whether medieval people understood the concept of bacteria in any meaningful way. They didn't have the science for it, of course, but they had observations, patterns, experiences passed down through generations. They knew that some methods worked, even if they didn't know why. You begin slicing the apples, removing the softest parts, keeping what remains. They'll be cooked down, mixed into something else, transformed enough that their imperfections won't matter. Cooking is, in many ways, a kind of disguise, a way of reshaping what exists into something acceptable. A faint memory surfaces, someone once mentioning that spices were used heavily, not just for taste, but to mask the flavour of food that was beginning to turn. It's a common idea, but not entirely accurate. While spices did enhance flavour, they were also expensive, sometimes incredibly so. Wasting them on truly spoiled food wouldn't make much sense. More often, they were used to elevate dishes, not to salvage the unsalvageable. Still, the line between acceptable and unacceptable is thinner than you might like. You glance at the master cook again, watching how he inspects a dish. There's no hesitation in his movements, no uncertainty. He trusts his judgment completely. You're not there yet, but you're learning. A small, almost curious detail crosses your mind as you work. In some medieval texts, there are references to testing, food by smell, taste, even touch, pressing, observing, interpreting subtle changes. It's not scientific in the modern sense, but it's not random either. It's knowledge built slowly, over time. You scrape the remaining apple pieces into a pot, adding them to a mixture already beginning to simmer. Heat will take care of the rest. It usually does. Usually. There's always that quiet uncertainty, though. That small question in the back of your mind. Is this still good? You push it aside, because you don't have the luxury of overthinking. A sudden movement nearby catches your attention. A scullion carrying out a bucket of scraps. This time, the contents are less useful. Peelings too far gone. Bits that can't be saved. Even here there are limits. You wipe your hands again, reaching for the next item. A loaf of bread, slightly hardened. Not fresh, but not inedible. It can be softened, repurposed, turned into something else. Bread especially has a second life in this kitchen. Soaked in broth. Broken into pieces, used as filler. Nothing truly ends where it began. You break the loaf apart, feeling the resistance give way under your fingers. It's dry, but manageable. You drop the pieces into another pot, watching as they begin to absorb liquid, slowly returning to something softer, something usable. A faint breeze slips through the high window, barely noticeable, but enough to shift the smoke slightly. For a brief moment, the air feels lighter. You take a small breath, then it's gone, replaced again by the familiar weight of heat and scent. A quirky belief drifts through your thoughts. In some places, it was thought that certain foods, if left too long, could develop harmful humours, imbalances that affected not just the body, but the mind. It's part of the broader medieval understanding of health, the idea that balance within the body was influenced by what you consumed. Historians still debate how seriously these ideas were applied in everyday cooking versus medical practice. But the influence is there, subtle but present. You stir the pot again, watching as the mixture thickens, transforms. What was once separate, apples, bread, broth, becomes something unified, something new. You step back slightly, taking in the space around you. The kitchen hasn't slowed, it hasn't paused, it's simply shifted focus, from preparation to preservation, from fresh to fading, from certainty to careful judgment. And you're right in the middle of it, balancing, adjusting, deciding. Because here, it's not enough to cook. You have to know what can still be cooked, and trust that your choices will hold. The longer you stay in the kitchen, the more you begin to notice something subtle, almost hidden beneath the heat and motion. There isn't much here, not in the way you might expect. No gleaming rows of specialized tools, no carefully labeled drawers filled with precise instruments. Instead, what surrounds you is simple, worn, used so often that each item feels like an extension of the hands that hold it. And yet, somehow, everything still works. You reach for a knife again, noticing how uneven the blade has become over time. It's been sharpened again and again, each pass taking just a little more metal away. It's not perfectly straight anymore. It doesn't need to be. It cuts. That's enough. Nearby, someone is stirring a pot with a long wooden spoon, darkened from years of use. Its surface smooth in some places, rough in others. You've seen that same spoon used for soups, stews, even sauces. There's no strict separation. Tools are shared, adapted, repurposed. You move toward a hanging rack where a few metal implements dangle, hooks, ladles, something that might have once been part of a larger set. You take what you need without hesitation. No one stops you, no one questions it. Because here, tools belong to the kitchen more than to any one person. In medieval times, especially in large households, the variety of cooking tools was surprisingly limited. Pots, pans, knives, spits, mortars and pestles. These formed the core of the kitchen. Everything else was built around them. Historians often point out that innovation didn't come from new tools as much as it came from new ways of using the same ones, and you're starting to see how that works. You return to your station, setting down a heavy pot that still holds the warmth of the fire. It's slightly uneven at the base, causing it to tilt just a fraction when placed on flat stone. You adjust it instinctively, finding the balance point. That small adjustment matters. Everything here is about making imperfect things function. A sudden call from across the room. Someone needs something quickly. You glance around. There's no exact tool for what they're asking, but that doesn't stop anyone. A cloth is folded. A stick is used as leverage. A knife becomes something more than a blade. Improvisation isn't optional. It's expected. You find yourself doing the same without thinking, using the edge of a wooden board to guide something into place, pressing, adjusting, adapting. Your hands begin to understand what your mind hasn't fully put into words yet. Tools don't define the work defines the tools. A faint grinding sound pulls your attention to the side. Someone is using a mortar and pestle again, crushing herbs into a coarse paste. The motion is steady, circular, almost meditative. You step closer for a moment, watching how the texture changes, leaves breaking down, releasing scent, becoming something more concentrated. This simple tool does so much. In fact, it's one of the most important in the entire kitchen. Grinding, blending, transforming. A quirky detail slips into your thoughts. In some medieval recipes, ingredients were ground not just for texture, but because it was believed that breaking them down released their essence more fully, enhancing both flavour and in some cases supposed medicinal properties. It's a blend of practicality and belief, hard to separate the two. You move back, returning to your own task. A pot needs adjusting again. You reach for a cloth, folding it quickly to protect your hand as you grip the hot metal. There's no perfect glove, just layers of fabric and careful timing. You lift, shift, lower. The movement is quick but controlled. Too slow, and the heat becomes unbearable. Too fast, and you risk dropping it. Precision, even in something as simple as lifting a pot. You set it down and immediately reach for a wooden spoon, stirring the contents without pause. The rhythm continues, always the rhythm. Around you, similar movements repeat. Different tasks, same underlying pattern. Adaptation, efficiency, constant motion. You begin to notice how little is wasted, not just in food, but in effort. Every action serves a purpose. Every movement leads into the next. Even the space itself is used fully. Hooks on walls, shelves carved into stone, surfaces that double as preparation areas and storage. Nothing is purely decorative. Everything earns its place. A brief moment of curiosity crosses your mind. In some castles, kitchens were designed with multiple hearths, each serving a different function: baking, roasting, boiling. The layout wasn't random, it reflected the needs of the household. Historians still argue how standardized these layouts were across regions, but the principle remains clear. The kitchen is built around the work, not the other way around. You glance down at your hands again. There's a thin layer of something on them. Ash, flour, maybe both. It doesn't matter. You wipe them quickly and continue. Cleanliness here is relative. You pick up a piece of bread again, this time using it to test the consistency of a dish. You dip it briefly, lift it, observe how it holds. It's not a formal measurement. It doesn't need to be. It tells you enough. You adjust the pot slightly, adding a bit more liquid, then stirring again. The change is subtle, but you feel it. You're beginning to trust your instincts. That might be the most important tool of all. A sudden clatter behind you, a utensil dropped. You turn just enough to see it retrieved quickly, wiped, returned to use. No pause, no complaint. Things happen, they're handled, the work continues. There's something strangely calming about that. No overreaction, no lingering frustration, just movement forward. You take a small breath, barely noticeable, and shift your stance again. Your body adjusts constantly, finding ways to remain efficient despite the strain. The tools may be simple, the conditions may be harsh, but the system works because it has to. And as you continue moving through it, cutting, stirring, lifting, adapting, you realize something quiet, something steady. It's not the tools that make the cook. It's the ability to make anything work, no matter how little you have. The rhythm you've settled into doesn't break. It builds. At first it's subtle, a few more voices layered into the background, a slightly faster pace to the movements around you. But then, almost all at once, the kitchen shifts into something sharper, more urgent. A feast is coming. You don't need to be told directly. You feel it in the way the master cook moves, faster now, more decisive. In the way extra tables are cleared, more ingredients brought forward, more fires stoked higher than usual. This isn't a normal meal, this is something larger. You adjust your position as people begin moving past you more frequently, carrying trays, baskets, entire cuts of meat. The space feels tighter, even though nothing has physically changed. It's the energy. Everything is accelerating. In medieval castles, feasts were more than just meals. They were displays of wealth, of power, of generosity. Guests would be invited, alliances strengthened, impressions made, and all of it depended on what happened here. You're handed a task without warning, more vegetables quickly prepared. You don't ask questions, you don't need to. Your hands already know what to do: cut, slice, move, faster now. The steady rhythm from earlier is still there, but it's been pushed forward, like a river after heavy rain. There's less space between actions, less room for pause. Mistakes feel closer. You hear the crackle of the fire intensify as more wood is added. Flames leap higher, brighter, casting shifting shadows across the stone walls. The heat rises with them, pressing harder against your skin. It's becoming almost overwhelming. Almost. But you keep moving. A large roasting spit turns nearby, heavier now, carrying something substantial. Perhaps a whole animal, carefully prepared. The scent is rich, deep, filling the air in a way that makes everything else seem secondary. Someone tends it constantly, adjusting its position, ensuring even cooking. It cannot be left alone. Nothing can. You glance toward a separate table where something more delicate is being assembled. Pastries, perhaps, or something close to it. The movements there are different, slower, more precise, even in the middle of all this urgency. Not all dishes are treated the same. Some require calm, even in chaos. A sudden shout, short, sharp. Not anger, but urgency. Something is needed immediately. You move before fully processing the words, grabbing what you think is required, passing it along. You're right. There's no acknowledgement, but none is needed. The work continues. A tray nearly collides with your arm as someone rushes past. You step back just in time, heart jumping slightly before settling again. There's no space for lingering reactions. Everything is too fast. You return to your task, barely missing a beat. A strange, almost fascinating detail crosses your mind as you work. During some grand medieval feasts, dishes were presented in courses that didn't follow the modern structure of appetizers, mains, and desserts. Instead, multiple types of food were served together. Sweet, savoury, heavy, light, all at once. It wasn't about order, it was about abundance. Historians still argue whether this style of serving was meant to impress visually or simply reflected different dining customs, but one thing is clear. It required an incredible level of coordination behind the scenes, coordination that you're now part of. You begin transferring prepared ingredients into a larger pot, working quickly but carefully. The mixture thickens as it cooks, requiring constant stirring. Your arm begins to ache slightly, but you ignore it. There's no time to stop. Nearby, someone drops something, a brief clatter that cuts through the noise. For a split second, everything feels like it might unravel, but it doesn't. The item is recovered. The task resumes. The rhythm holds. That might be the most impressive part. Even at this pace, the system doesn't collapse. It bends, it stretches, but it holds. You wipe your hands again, reaching for the next task before the previous one fully ends. There's overlap now, multiple responsibilities at once. You adjust, shifting your focus back and forth, trusting yourself to keep track. And somehow, you do. A tray is being assembled nearby, larger than before, more elaborate. Multiple dishes arranged together, each one placed with intention. You catch glimpses of colour, texture, variety. This is what the feast looks like, before it leaves the kitchen. It's almost beautiful. Almost. Because you don't have time to fully see it. You step aside as it's lifted, carried away with careful urgency. Another follows, and another, a steady stream. The kitchen doesn't pause between them. It can't. The demand is continuous. A faint sound reaches you again. Louder this time. Voices, laughter, the distant echo of activity from the great hall. The feast has begun. And you're still here. Still moving. Still working. There's something oddly grounding about that. The separation. They experience the result. You experience the process. You stir the pot again, adjusting the heat slightly, watching how it responds. Small changes. Constant attention. Everything matters, even now. A curious thought drifts through your mind. In some accounts, medieval feasts included dishes designed purely for spectacle. Food shaped into castles, animals, even mythical creatures. Not always practical. Not always meant to be eaten fully. Just seen. A display of skill, of excess. Historians still debate how common these were, but the idea lingers. Food as something more than sustenance. You glance around the kitchen again. Here, it's different. Here, food is work. Relentless. Continuous work. You shift your stance, feeling the strain in your legs, the heat pressing against you, the noise surrounding you, and yet, you keep going. Because the feast doesn't end when the first dishes are served, it continues, and so do you. The pace doesn't slow after the feast begins, it changes again. Not as frantic as the initial rush, not as steady as the early morning, but something in between. A constant adjustment, guided by rules that don't come from the master cook this time. They come from somewhere higher, from tradition, from belief. You notice it first in what's missing. A dish that should be there isn't. A type of meat you prepared earlier is set aside, untouched for now. Instead, other ingredients are brought forward. Fish, grains, vegetables. At first it feels like a mistake. Then you remember, it's a fasting day. In medieval life, religion shapes everything, including what can and cannot be eaten. Certain days, sometimes many days, are governed by strict rules. Meat is avoided, animal products limited, meals adjusted, and the kitchen adapts. You find yourself working with fish again. Its texture familiar now, though its scent still cuts sharply through the air. It's prepared differently than meat, handled with care, often paired with sauces or herbs to balance its natural flavour. Because during fasting periods, the absence of meat doesn't mean the absence of effort. If anything, it demands more creativity. Historians often note that medieval fasting rules were extensive, covering not just major religious observances like Lent, but many days throughout the year. In some regions, people spent nearly a third of the year under some form of dietary restriction, which means this isn't unusual, this is routine. You adjust your position, reaching for a bundle of herbs. Their scent rises quickly as you begin to work with them, fresher than most things in the kitchen, lighter. It changes the atmosphere slightly. Less heavy, less dense, but still intense. A pot nearby simmers with a mixture of grains and vegetables, its surface bubbling gently. You stir it, feeling the difference immediately. Lighter than the meat-based stews, simpler, perhaps, but not insignificant. These meals still need to satisfy. You glance toward the master cook again. His movements haven't slowed. If anything, they've become more precise. There's less margin for error now, not because the dishes are simpler, but because expectations remain high. Fasting doesn't mean lowering standards, it means changing them. A small, almost curious detail crosses your mind. In some interpretations of medieval fasting rules, fish wasn't considered meat in the same way as land animals. Even creatures like beavers or certain birds were sometimes classified differently, depending on local customs. It's flexible. More flexible than you might expect. Historians still argue how strictly these rules were followed across different regions and social classes. Some suggest that wealthier households found ways to maintain variety even during fasting periods, while others believe the restrictions were more uniformly observed. Standing here, it feels like a mix of both. The rules exist, but so does adaptation. You begin preparing a sauce, something to accompany the fish. Vinegar, herbs, perhaps a touch of something sweeter if available. The balance is delicate, too sharp and it overpowers, too mild and it disappears. You taste it. Just a small amount, enough to judge. It's close. You adjust it slightly, adding a bit more of one ingredient, stirring again. Better. This act of tasting, of testing, is constant now. Not just for you, but for others as well. Small samples taken, quick decisions made. Because once the dish leaves the kitchen, there's no adjusting it. It is what it is. A tray passes by, carrying several fish dishes arranged neatly. You watch it go for a brief moment, noting how different it looks from the earlier trays, less heavy, more varied in colour, still impressive, still deliberate. The feast continues upstairs, shaped quietly by the rules you're following down here. You move back to your station, reaching for another ingredient, a handful of dried fruits, perhaps to be added to a dish, bringing a touch of sweetness. It's a contrast you're starting to understand. Without meat, flavour has to come from elsewhere, from combinations, from balance. A faint sound drifts down again. Laughter, conversation, the distant hum of voices. It feels slightly different now, lighter maybe, or perhaps that's just your imagination. You wipe your hands again, focusing on the task in front of you. There's no time to wonder too much. A scullion passes behind you, carrying away another bucket, this one lighter than before. Less waste, different ingredients, even the scraps change with the rules. You stir another pot, watching as the mixture thickens slowly. It's steady work, less dramatic than the earlier rush, but no less important. Consistency matters here, especially now. A quirky belief surfaces in your thoughts. In some medieval traditions, fasting wasn't just about physical restraint. It was believed to have spiritual benefits, cleansing the body and mind. The food prepared during these times was part of that process. Simpler, perhaps, but meaningful. Historians still debate how much of this was deeply felt versus socially enforced. But the impact on daily life, including the kitchen, is undeniable. You adjust the heat again, moving the pot slightly away from the strongest part of the fire. The flames respond immediately, their intensity shifting. You've learned to read them now, to work with them. The kitchen feels different during these moments. Not quieter, not calmer, but more focused in a different way. Less about abundance, more about adaptation. You glance around again, taking it in. The same space, the same people, but a different rhythm, and you're moving with it. Because here even belief becomes part of the work, shaping what you cook, how you cook, and why. Even in the middle of all this rhythm, this constant motion, this careful balance, there's something else you begin to notice. A quiet, persistent edge of danger. It doesn't announce itself loudly. It doesn't need to. It's simply there, woven into everything you do. In the heat, in the tools, in the speed. You feel it first as a small sting. A quick slip of the knife. Not deep, not serious, but enough to make you pause for half a heartbeat. You look down. A thin line across your finger, barely bleeding. You wipe it on your apron without thinking, and keep going. Because stopping isn't really an option. In a medieval kitchen, injuries like this are common, expected even. Cuts, burns, bruises, they happen so often that they barely interrupt the flow of work. Historians often note that workplace safety, as you might understand it today, simply didn't exist in the same way. The focus was on getting the work done, not minimizing risk. You adjust your grip on the knife slightly, more aware now, and continue slicing. The motion remains steady, but your attention sharpens. Nearby, the fire shifts again, louder this time. A sudden flare as fat drips onto the flames below a roasting spit. For a brief moment, the fire leaps higher than expected, forcing the person tending it to step back quickly. No panic, just reaction. A cloth is used to shield, a quick adjustment made, and the flames settle again. You watch it happen, feeling that quiet reminder settle deeper into your awareness. The fire is useful, but it's never safe. You move to lift another pot, wrapping your hand in cloth as always. Still, the heat pushes through, sharp, immediate. You grit your teeth slightly as you set it down. It's manageable. It always is, until it isn't. A faint smell reaches you. Not food this time, but something slightly off. Burnt fabric, maybe. You glance over and see someone shaking out their sleeve, having gotten just a bit too close to the flame. They check it quickly. No real damage. Work continues. There's no space here for long reactions, for extended concern. Everything is measured in seconds. How quickly you recover, how fast you return to the task. That's what matters. A sudden crash echoes from the far side of the kitchen, a pot hitting the floor. This time, it's louder, more noticeable. Conversations pause for just a fraction of a moment. You look over. The contents have spilled. Nothing dangerous, just food lost. The person responsible freezes for a second, then immediately begins cleaning it up. No shouting, no punishment. At least not here. But the tension lingers. Mistakes cost more than just time. You turn back to your work. Your movements just a little more careful now. Not slower, never slower, but more controlled. Because you've seen how quickly things can shift. A strange, almost unsettling detail crosses your mind. In some medieval accounts, kitchen injuries were so common that people developed their own ways of dealing with them. Simple remedies, quick fixes, sometimes nothing at all. A burn might be cooled with waters or left alone. A cut might be wrapped or ignored. Historians still argue how effective these methods were, but one thing is clear, people kept working. You press your fingers briefly against the edge of the table, grounding yourself, then continue. The knife moves again. Slice, slice, slice. The rhythm returns, but the awareness stays. You hear another small sound, a hiss as liquid spills onto hot stone, turning instantly to steam. It disappears almost as quickly as it forms. Everything here reacts. Everything responds. You shift your stance slightly, feeling the strain in your legs again. Standing for so long on hard surfaces takes its toll, but it's not something you focus on. It's just part of it. A constant background sensation, like the heat or the smoke. A scullion passes by carrying a stack of metal utensils, their edges clinking together with each step. One slips slightly, nearly falling, but is caught just in time. A near miss, you barely register it, because there are so many. That might be the most surprising thing, not the danger itself, but how normal it feels. You reach for another ingredient, your hands moving automatically. There's no hesitation now. The earlier uncertainty about the fire, the tools, the pace has been replaced by something else. Familiarity. You know where to stand, where not to stand, what to touch, what to avoid. It's not perfect knowledge, but it's enough. A faint thought drifts through your mind. In large medieval kitchens, fires could sometimes grow out of control, spreading beyond the hearth. Entire buildings have been lost this way, especially in places where wood and thatch were common materials. The risk is always there, even if it doesn't show itself today. Historians still debate how often such disasters occurred in castle kitchens specifically, but the possibility alone shapes how people work around fire. Careful, attentive, always aware. You adjust a pot again, this time moving it slightly further from the flame. The contents were beginning to catch at the bottom. You caught it just in time. A small success, one of many. You stir it slowly, feeling the texture change back to something smoother. The smell improves, the slight burnt edge fading into something more acceptable. Another problem managed, another risk avoided. You take a small breath, steadying yourself again. The kitchen continues, uninterrupted. And as you move through it, cutting, lifting, adjusting, you realize something simple, something quietly important. Danger isn't something separate from the work, it's part of it, always there, always waiting. And you've learned how to move around it, without stopping, without thinking, just continuing. By now, your movements feel almost automatic. You reach, stir, cut, adjust, each action flowing into the next without needing to be fully thought through. The rhythm of the kitchen has settled into you so deeply that even the noise feels distant, like something you're inside of rather than reacting to. And yet there's one part of the work that still demands your full attention. Tasting, not for pleasure, not really, for certainty. You stand over a pot that's been simmering for some time now, its surface gently shifting as small bubbles rise and break. The scent is layered, meat, herbs, something slightly sweet underneath. It smells good, but that's not enough. You take a small piece of bread, just as you've done before, and dip it carefully into the mixture. Not too deep, just enough to gather a sample. You lift it, watching the liquid cling, then bring it closer. A brief pause, then you taste. It's quick, controlled. You let the flavour settle for just a second, your mind working through it almost instinctively. Too salty, too bland. Something missing. It's close, but not quite right. You reach for a pinch of herbs, adding them slowly, stirring them in. The scent shifts almost immediately, subtle but noticeable. You wait a moment, then taste again. Better. That small adjustment makes the difference. This is the part of the work where mistakes matter most, because once the food leaves the kitchen, there's no fixing it, no second chance. In many medieval kitchens, the responsibility of tasting often fell to trusted individuals, those with enough experience to recognize imbalance quickly. In some cases, especially in royal households, there were even designated tasters, though their role was often tied to something more serious. Poison. It's a thought that drifts through your mind quietly, almost casually. Not common, but not unheard of either. Historians still argue how frequent poisoning attempts actually were in medieval courts. Some suggest it was rare, more a fear than a regular occurrence. Others believe it happened often enough to influence how food was handled. Either way, trust becomes important. You glance briefly at the master cook again. He tastes as well, though less frequently. When he does, it's decisive. No hesitation. A quick judgment, then action. You're still learning that level of confidence, but you're getting closer. You move on to another dish, this one thicker, heavier. You stir it slowly, feeling the resistance through the spoon. It's nearing completion. You know that just by the way it moves. Still, you test it. A small sample, a brief taste. This one holds. No adjustment needed. There's a quiet satisfaction in that. Not pride, exactly, but something close. Nearby, another cook tastes a sauce and immediately frowns slightly. Too sharp, perhaps. You watch as they adjust it, adding something to soften the edge, stirring quickly, tasting again. The process repeats, over and over. Taste, adjust, taste again. It's a cycle within the larger cycle of the kitchen. You begin to realise that this might be one of the few moments where personal judgment truly matters, where your own perception, your own sense of balance, directly affects the outcome. Everything else follows structure. This relies on you. A small, almost amusing detail crosses your mind. In some medieval beliefs, taste itself was linked to the body's internal balance. The idea that certain flavours could influence health by correcting imbalances in the humours. Sweet, sour, bitter, salty, all thought to have different effects. Historians still debate how much this influenced everyday cooking versus medical practice, but it's hard to ignore the connection when you're standing here, adjusting flavours in real time. You taste again, just to be sure. Still good. You move on. A tray is being prepared nearby, and this time you're a little closer to it. Close enough to see the details, the arrangement, the colours, the way each dish complements the others. It's not random, it's intentional, even if you're not the one deciding it. You step back as it's lifted, giving space, watching it disappear toward the hall once again. There's a brief moment, just a second, where you imagine the reaction. The first bite, the quiet judgment, approval or not. And then the moment passes, because another dish needs attention. You return to your station, your hands moving without pause. The work continues just as it always does, but something has shifted. You're not just following instructions anymore. You're contributing. Small decisions, subtle changes, they matter. You feel that now. A faint sound drifts down again. Voices, laughter, the ongoing life of the feast above. It feels distant, almost separate from where you stand, and yet connected. Everything you do here echoes there, even if you never see it. You wipe your hands again, reaching for another sample, another quick taste. The flavour settles easily this time. No change needed. You nod slightly to yourself, barely noticeable, and continue. Because here, in this place, certainty doesn't come from looking. It comes from tasting, from trusting what you sense, even when no one is watching. By the time the main rush begins to ease, something changes in the air. Not the heat, it's still there, pressing in, constant as ever. Not the noise either, though it softens slightly, losing that sharp edge of urgency. It's something quieter than that. A shift in purpose. The dishes that mattered most, the ones destined for the high table, have already left. What remains now is different, less refined, less watched, but no less important. You notice it first in the way people move, still working, but not quite as tightly wound. There's a little more space between actions, a little less tension in the shoulders of those around you, and then you see it. A tray set slightly aside, not abandoned, just no longer needed in the same way. On it pieces of bread, bits of meat, fragments of what once would have been carefully arranged dishes, now broken apart, leftovers. You hesitate for just a moment, not because you don't understand, but because this is something new. Up until now, everything has been about preparation, about sending food outward, upward, away from you. This is different. This comes back. You glance around briefly, noticing how others approach it. No one rushes, no one grabs. There's an unspoken order here too, subtle, understood. You step closer, carefully. The bread is slightly hardened now, its surface losing that fresh softness it once had. Still edible, still valuable. Nothing here is wasted if it can be helped. You pick up a small piece, turning it slightly in your fingers before taking a bite. It's simple, plain. But after everything, the heat, the smoke, the constant movement, it feels grounding. A quiet moment in the middle of everything else. In many medieval kitchens, food distribution followed strict hierarchies. The best cuts went to the highest ranks, while servants and workers often relied on what remained. Historians still discuss how fair or unfair these systems were, but the pattern appears again and again in records. What's left becomes survival. You take another bite, slower this time. Nearby, someone pours a bit of broth into a small wooden bowl, something that didn't quite make it to the table, or perhaps something set aside deliberately. It's passed quietly to another worker. No ceremony, no acknowledgement. Just shared. There's something almost comforting in that. a kind of quiet understanding. You move slightly to the side, leaning against a rough wooden surface for just a moment. Your legs welcome the brief shift, the chance to rest even if only slightly. Around you, others do the same in their own ways. A quick drink of water, a small piece of food, a breath, then back to work, because even now, it's not over. The kitchen never truly stops. You notice how some of the scraps are already being gathered, set aside not for eating now, but for later use. Bones, trimmings, pieces that still hold some value. Nothing is ignored, everything has purpose. A thought crosses your mind. In some cases, leftovers would be repurposed into entirely new dishes. Stews, pies, mixtures where individual ingredients blended together into something else entirely. Historians often point to this as both necessity and ingenuity. Waste wasn't just undesirable, it was dangerous. You finish what little you've taken, brushing your hands lightly against your apron again. There's no indulgence here, no sense of eating for pleasure. It's fuel, nothing more. But even that matters. A faint sound drifts in again from beyond the kitchen, the distant echo of the feast continuing. Laughter, movement, the clink of cups. It feels farther away now, less immediate, as if your connection to it has shifted. You're no longer sending food toward it, you're simply sustaining yourself beneath it. You push yourself upright again, stepping back into motion. The pause was brief. It had to be. There's still cleaning to be done, still preparation for what comes next, because there is always a next. A scullion moves past you carrying a bucket, the water inside already clouded from use. Another follows, collecting utensils, stacking them for washing. The rhythm has changed, but it hasn't stopped. It's just quieter now, more deliberate. You pick up a cloth, beginning to wipe down a surface. The motion is slower than before, but no less necessary. Each stroke clears away the remains of what was, preparing the space for what will come. Because it will all begin again, sooner than you expect. Another tray passes by, this one emptier than the last. A few scraps remain, quickly claimed, quickly gone. Nothing lingers, nothing waits. You pause for just a second, looking round the kitchen again. It feels different now. Not calmer exactly, but settled. As if the storm has passed, leaving behind the work of putting things back together. You take a small breath and continue. Because here, survival isn't just about enduring the work, it's about what you take from it. Even if it's only what's left behind. As the pace softens and the sharpest edge of the work begins to fade, something else starts to take its place. Not silence. That never truly comes here, but a different kind of sound. Lower voices, closer conversations. You don't notice it all at once. At first, it's just fragments. Words that drift past without meaning. Half-heard exchanges between people still moving through their tasks. But slowly, it becomes clearer. The kitchen, you realise, isn't just a place of labour. It's a place of information. You hear it in passing. A name, mentioned quickly. A place, referenced without explanation. A quiet comment followed by a knowing glance. Nothing obvious. Nothing that would stand out if you weren't paying attention. But you are, because now you have the space to notice. You're wiping down another surface, your movement steady, when a pair of voices nearby dips just slightly lower. Not enough to be secret, but enough to suggest something more private. You don't turn, you don't react, you simply listen. Arrived, later than expected, one voice says. And not alone, another replies. There's a pause, a small one, then a faint sound, something like a quiet laugh, quickly suppressed. You keep working, because that's what you're supposed to do. But your awareness shifts. In many medieval households, kitchens were central hubs, not just for food, but for communication. Servants moved between spaces, carrying dishes, messages, observations. They saw things, heard things, sometimes more than they were meant to. Historians often suggest that kitchens, like other servant spaces, could become places where information gathered, and sometimes spread. Not formally, not officially, but quietly. You rinse the cloth in a bucket, wringing it out slowly. The water is cooler now, a small relief against your hands. Behind you, someone speaks again, this time a little louder. The Lord didn't seem pleased. Did he ever? Comes the reply. A few people nearby react. Small smiles, quick glances. Nothing overt, just enough to show that the comment has landed. You begin to understand something subtle, something that isn't written anywhere but exists all the same. There are rules here, not just about work, about speech, what can be said, what can't, and more importantly, how it's said. You move to another table, continuing your work, but now the background noise feels different. Not just sound, but meaning layered beneath it. A mention of supplies running low, a quiet complaint about the quality of meat received that morning, a brief exchange about someone who didn't show up for work. Each piece is small, but together they form something larger, a picture of life beyond your immediate task, a system, a structure. You hear a name again, this time spoken with a bit more weight. Someone important. The tone shifts slightly, more careful now, more measured. Even without knowing exactly who it refers to, you recognize the change. Power. It's present here too, just in a different form. You glance briefly toward the master cook. He isn't part of these quieter conversations, or if he is, it's not in the same way. His authority is clear, direct. But this exchange of words, of small pieces of knowledge, it moves differently, less visible, but no less real. A strange thought crosses your mind. In some cases, servants who worked in kitchens could gain a kind of influence simply by what they knew, and what they chose to share. Historians still debate how often this translated into real power, but there are accounts, stories of information passed quietly, shaping decisions in ways that weren't immediately obvious. You return your focus to the task in front of you, but the awareness remains. Every word matters, even the ones that seem unimportant. A small burst of laughter rises from one corner of the kitchen, quickly contained but genuine. It breaks the tension for just a moment, reminding you that despite everything, there's still room here for something lighter, something human. You find yourself almost reacting to it. A slight shift in your posture, a quiet easing of the constant focus. Then it passes, and the work continues. You pick up another utensil, cleaning it carefully, your hands moving with practiced precision now. The motions feel easier than before, more natural, but your mind is more active, listening, not just to instructions, but to everything. Because here, in this place, knowledge doesn't come from books or formal teaching. It comes from being present, from noticing, from understanding what's said and what isn't. A final exchange drifts past you, too quiet to fully catch, but enough to sense its tone. Serious, measured, then gone. You don't follow it. You don't need to, because you already understand the most important part. This kitchen isn't just feeding the castle, it's connected to it. Every room, every person, every decision, in ways that aren't always visible. You set the last cleaned utensil aside, aligning it with the others, then straighten slightly, letting your shoulders rise and fall with a slow breath. The noise continues around you, the movement, the quiet conversations, and you. You move within it, not just as a worker anymore, but as someone who sees, who hears, who understands, just a little more than before. At some point, though you're not entirely sure when, the kitchen begins to feel different again. Not because anything has stopped, but because something has shifted. The work continues, yes. The cleaning, the sorting, the quiet conversations still ripple through the space, but beneath all of it there's a subtle change you can't ignore. The air feels cooler, only slightly, barely enough to notice at first, but it's there. You pause for a brief moment, just long enough to recognize it. The oppressive weight of the earlier heat hasn't vanished, but it's loosened its grip. The fires burn lower now, not extinguished, never that, but controlled, contained, resting, much like everything else. You move toward a nearby table, your hands continuing their work almost automatically, but your awareness drifting outward again. This change, it isn't random. It's part of something larger, seasonal rhythm. Even here, inside stone walls and constant fire, the outside world still finds its way in. You notice it in the ingredients first. The vegetables you handled earlier, some fresh, some already beginning to lose their strength, reflect what's available at this time. What can be grown, what can be stored, what has lasted, and what hasn't. In medieval life, seasons shaped everything. What people ate, how they worked, even how they lived day to day. Historians often emphasise how deeply tied daily routines were to the agricultural calendar. Harvests determined abundance. Winters brought scarcity. Preservation wasn't just a convenience, it was survival. You glance toward a corner where stored goods are kept. Sacks, containers, bundles, each holding something that has been dried, salted or otherwise preserved. Food from another time, kept for now. You realise that what you cooked earlier wasn't just chosen at random, it was dictated by time, by season, by what existed to be used. You pick up a small bundle of herbs, their scent faint but still present. Not as vibrant as something freshly picked, but enough to add depth when needed. You rub them lightly between your fingers. Even now, they have purpose. Nearby, someone mentioned something about the coming weeks, something about supplies needing to last longer. You don't catch all of it, but the tone is enough. Concern, planning. Because what comes next matters. You begin to understand how this place doesn't just react to the present, it prepares for the future, quietly, constantly. You return to your work, but now every motion feels connected to something beyond the moment. Every cleaned surface, every stored ingredient, every decision, it all feeds into what happens next. Tomorrow, next week, the next season. A thought settles into your mind. During colder months, kitchens like this would have felt different entirely. Heavier foods, thicker stews, more reliance on preserved meats and grains, less variety, but more necessity. Historians still piece together exactly how these transitions felt day to day, but the pattern is clear. Adaptation. Always adapting. You move toward the hearth again, noticing how the fire is being managed now, smaller, steadier. No longer the roaring force it was before, controlled energy, save for when it's needed again. A faint draft slips through somewhere, so subtle you might have missed it earlier. Now, it's noticeable, a reminder that outside still exists, even if you haven't seen it all day. You take a small breath, the air feeling just a bit easier to take in. Around you, others seem to feel it too, even if no one says it out loud. Movements slow just slightly. Shoulders relax, if only a little, not rest, but something closer to it. You pick up another item, placing it carefully among the others. Order is returning. The chaos of earlier has been replaced by structure once again. Everything in its place, ready, because it has to be. A quiet realization settles over you. This kitchen is not just a place of work, it's part of a cycle, a system that never truly stops, only shifts from preparation to action to recovery, then back again. You feel it now more clearly than before, that sense of repetition, of continuation, a rhythm that doesn't depend on you, but that you've become part of anyway. You glance once more around the room, the fires, the tools, the people, all moving, all adjusting, all preparing for what comes next. And you understand something simple, something steady. Tomorrow, it will begin again. Maybe with different ingredients, different demands, different pressures, but the same rhythm, the same cycle. And you'll be here within it, moving with it, adapting to it, just like everything else. By the time the last of the work begins to settle, you feel it more in your body than in the room. A heaviness, not sudden, not overwhelming, but steady, accumulated. It's in your hands first. The slight stiffness in your fingers after hours of gripping, cutting, lifting. Then your arms, carrying a dull ache that never fully formed into pain, but never disappeared either. Your shoulders follow, tight, weighted, as if they've been holding more than just the tasks you were given. You roll them slightly, just enough to notice the resistance, then let them fall back into place. There's still movement around you, of course. There always is. But it's different now. Slower, quieter. The sharp urgency that defined the earlier hours has faded into something more subdued. People still work, still move from one task to another, but without that same intensity. It's the end of something. Not the end of the day entirely, but close enough. You pick up one last item, turning it in your hands before setting it where it belongs. The action feels deliberate, final in a way the others didn't. Around you, others are doing the same, finishing, closing small tasks, bringing things back into order. There's no announcement, no signal, just a shared understanding that the hardest part is over, for now. You take a small step back, letting your eyes move across the kitchen one more time. It looks familiar now, not because it's changed, but because you have. The same fires burn low in their places, the same tables stand where they always have, the same tools rest, waiting for the next use. But where earlier everything felt overwhelming, too much, too fast, too intense, now it feels readable, understandable. You know where things happen, where they begin, where they end. That knowledge settles into you quietly, a kind of earned awareness. You lean slightly against a nearby surface, not fully resting, just allowing your weight to shift for a moment. Your legs welcome it immediately, the subtle strain easing just enough to notice. It doesn't last long, it can't, but it's enough. In medieval kitchens, workdays like this weren't unusual. Long hours, constant labour, little separation between one day and the next. Historians often describe it not as a series of distinct shifts, but as a continuous flow, work blending into rest, then back into work again. You feel that now. There's no clean break, no clear ending, just a pause, a breath between cycles. You straighten again, your body responding a little slower than it did before, not unwilling, just tired, naturally tired. The kind that comes from doing something over and over until it becomes part of you. A faint sound reaches you once more from beyond the kitchen walls. The tail end of the feast, perhaps. It's quieter now too, less vibrant than before, winding down, just like everything here. You wonder, briefly, what it looks like out there now. The tables, the people, the remains of what was once a lively gathering. But the thought doesn't stay long, because your place is here. And here things are nearly ready to begin again. Not immediately, but soon. You move toward the edge of the room, your steps slower now, more measured. There's no rush anymore, no urgency pushing you forward, just motion, habit. You glance back once more, not out of necessity but instinct, taking it in, the space, the rhythm, the work, and for a moment everything feels still, not truly still, but close enough. You take a breath, deep enough to feel it, and then let it go. Because even though this part is ending, nothing really stops. The fires will rise again, the noise will return, the pace will build, and you'll step back into it, without hesitation. Because now you understand what this life is. Not a single moment, not a single task, but a cycle, endless, demanding, unforgiving, and yet strangely steady. Something you don't just survive, something you become part of. You shift your weight once more, then turn, letting your body carry you forward into whatever comes next. Not resisting, not questioning, just continuing. Because in this place, that's all there is to do.